Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant. We hope you're enjoying the first weekend of December, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. As we get busy getting ready for Christmas and New Year's holidays, our schools are just wrapping up the semester. Many education advocates are on all sides now looking ahead to the 2017 session of the Kentucky General Assembly. Now that Republicans control both chambers in Frankfort, it's widely believed that charter schools will be up for consideration. Kentucky is one of a handful of states with no provisions for charters. School choice advocates are for it, while some believe it could hurt public education in the Commonwealth. We'll talk with Commissioner Pruitt about that today. He is with us from the Kentucky Department of Education. President-elect Donald Trump being urged by many to do away with Common Core standards, and his campaign ads called Common Core a total disaster. How does Commissioner Pruitt feel about that, and whether Kentucky schools are, what are they doing to prepare students for the big challenges ahead? Do students need to identify their future direction in life at a younger age? We also want to get his take on safety issues at school and onboard school buses after some high-profile stories in the news lately on that. Commissioner Pruitt was once a high school chemistry teacher. Later, he worked to help craft the next generation science standards, and he's been running the Kentucky Department of Education over the past year. And so we welcome Commissioner Stephen Pruitt to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, there was a big meeting that caught our attention. There's a reason we wanted to get you in here if we could this week, and that was the Kentucky Board of Education, which normally doesn't have a large crowd, but you had a pretty good audience over there for this, as there was a discussion about charter schools. What was talked about?
Well, we decided that, that as the conversation has ramped up at our board meeting back in October, there was a lot of discussion around charter schools, and as I sat and listened to everybody talk, it's sort of really hammered home for me a lot of the issues that we've heard around charters, where there wasn't a lot of common understanding about what charters even were. So we decided that we were going to have a special study session, and so we pulled people together and approached it from an academic, intellectual exercise. It was not a political discussion at all. It was actually, we brought in researchers and people that had backgrounds with charter schools to just really tell us what the research says.
And so the findings are, so the first thing is that a charter school really is whatever a state law says it is, right? So if Kentucky is to craft a provision for that, then the state decides a lot of things about what a charter school could be.
Yeah, there are 43 states plus the District of Columbia that all have charter school law, and it varies very widely. And that was part of the discussion is, when we talk about charters, are we really even saying the same words or using them in the same way? Obviously, this is going to be a legislative decision. There are policymakers, and we execute that policy. But we felt it was important to at least engage in that conversation up front. Kentucky is going to need to decide what charter schools mean for Kentucky.
In your view, should it spell out specifically the kinds of organizations that should run one? Could it be done by a for-profit company, for instance? Could it be a religious or civic group? Who would, how would those rules be made?
Well, I'm sure that our General Assembly is going to look at all the research and look at what's going on across the country. We're currently doing that just to help our board understand that better. I have a background in working with charter schools when I was in Georgia, and and it can vary. There can be a pretty wide range. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a problem when you have a for-profit company that's running a charter school, but I've seen some non-for-profits who do a great job. I've seen some mom-and-pop charter schools that do some great work, but I've also seen some that don't do so well. At the end of the day, it really does still boil down to leadership and good planning and good execution.
What are parents generally looking for when they are interested in sending their children to a charter school?
And, I think it varies. A lot of times I think it's that they're looking for another option, or they're looking for something that gives their child a different type of school day. We've seen charters that do everything from deal with extended time to language immersion charters, charters around STEM, charters around the arts. So a lot of times it boils down to a different type of experience for the child.
As you know, some concerns are raised by those who fear that charters could hurt public schools. Are there some issues with the fact that charter schools basically are cherry picking their students, or could.
Well, the hope would be, and for me personally, this would be an area that I would push on strongly, is that they can't cherry pick. The idea that charter school is supposed to be a public school, which means by definition, public schools take all. And when we talk about charters, I think one of the things that people get a little confused about is charters are still public schools. They're taking public money, so they still have to take public school students. Certainly, I think that there have been cases across the country, and we actually dealt with some in Georgia where there was a little bit more of a cherry-picking mentality, but I think that's where you have to put strong regulations in place. It's where you have to have strong oversight from the authorizer to ensure that that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, then you've got to be prepared to call them on it.
Could the Department of Education be involved in charters and in the governance of a charter school the same way you are with other public schools? I mean, if you see something that's out of queue right now, you might just step in.
Well, you know, certainly with charter schools, it all depends on how the law is written. At the end of the day, because they are public schools and taking public and federal money, they're still going to be subject to the same accountability system and all that. How the law is set up as far as who the authorizers are, we put a different kind of spin on exactly who's got the most hands-on with it. In Georgia, we had a whole charter school division, and if the General Assembly chooses to allow the state board to be one of the authorizers, then I would see that the Kentucky Department of Education, we would do a very similar thing. We would have a division dedicated to support of charter schools, to help them to develop their applications, helping them with their implementation, but also holding their feet to the fire to make sure that they're doing the right thing by students.
You must have in your own mind a best case scenario for how a charter school bill would be written that would be acceptable to you.
Well, again, there's a lot of different variants. I think that certainly it would be great if the local school boards are able to have some, maybe even the right of first refusal, possibly. But what we did for the charter itself, to be able to authorize the charter. Yeah. But you know what we did in Georgia was there was sort of this dual track. A charter school could apply to the local board, but they also applied to the state board at the same time. Because one of the things you don't want to have is a long, drawn-out process. If the local board denied it, then the state board could actually step in and authorize it. Eventually, there was a commission that could do the same thing. For me, I'm always nervous when we start adding more government or more bureaucracy, but at the end of the day, the authorizers need to be on the same page. And I think that there needs to be, either the law needs to be written in such a way that all the authorizers have the same requirements, or there needs to be some type of regulatory body over all authorizers, or you go with a fewer number of authorizers.
Commissioner, do you get any sense of a time frame on this? You have now, for the first time in 100 years in Kentucky or close to it, a Republican-led House. The Republicans control the Senate. You have a governor, all of whom, a Republican governor, all of whom have promised that there will be a school choice in this state. Do you think it happens sooner rather than later?
I would not be surprised if we do not see charter legislation right off the bat, and that it will probably go through fairly quickly. We've had, as you said, it's been part of campaign discussions. I think it's been a conversation in Kentucky for a long time. I know that when I was even going through the interview process, one of my questions to the board as I was being interviewed was, so what's going on with charter schools? And so I think it's going to happen. How quickly and what the conditions are, I think, are up for debate. But my guess is we'll see something this session, and I would not be surprised if it didn't happen pretty quickly.
And speaking of political influences in education, President-elect Trump has called Common Core a total disaster during his campaign. Many states were lured into it by incentives. We mentioned that earlier you were part of setting up some national standards. How do you feel about Common Core standards being kept or done away with?
Well, you know, I think it's like anything in education, or maybe in general with policy. Once they've been in for a while, it's time to take a look at them. Kentucky's had them in now for about 6 years. Before I got here, they had been gone through a revision and put out for public review. Since I've been here, we've been working on another revision of them. So I think it's going to be awfully hard to say that we still have Common Core once a revision goes through. Certainly we want to go through and have some more conversations about it. We've got more work we've got to do with that. I'm looking forward to working with the governor's office and to figure out the best way forward on that. But I think it's time for a change. I think it's time for us to go through some revisions and make sure that it's really doing what is best for our kids.
Do you think if local school boards do make the decisions district by district, that it would be difficult for students to transfer from one system to the other if the standards are greatly different?
I think so. I mean, I think that you want to have a level of statewide standard because I mean, it's an equity issue. You want to ensure that every student, regardless of where they live and what they look like, have opportunity to have education at a high level. Curriculum, of course, is a different issue, and that's one of the things that a lot of people get confused. You know, with standards, there's only so many ways you can say divide by double-digit numbers. Curriculum is a whole other ball of wax, and I think that is something that needs to be done at the local level. But a student needs to be able to divide by double-digit numbers regardless of where they are.
How do you advise education today to kind of allocate its time? There's the push really hard to get kids excited about the STEM subjects where it appears the money is and the jobs of the future. But how do schools balance that with the need to teach communication skills and to teach some history about the country and the world so that they're able to function in society?
Well, yeah, for me, it's a balanced approach, especially the younger you go. There's to have our kids be so focused on one particular area, I think is a bit of a challenge. Now, as they get older, as they get into middle school and high school, when they are having to start making decisions about what their life after school is, I think that sort of changes. You know, the idea of a graduation, high school graduation, that's no longer a destination, that's a milestone. We have to think about what kids are doing 2, 3, 20 years after. So, it's for me, the idea that we focus so much on math and reading, especially in elementary school, and because it's been so test-driven, I think that's been problematic. I think that we have cut out important subjects in the life of a child, like science, social studies, the arts, and we need to take a more balanced approach. In middle school, give them more opportunities to explore and see what options are out there, including even career fields. And then in high school, let them start to hone those skills and really focus. But things like communications and what our chamber calls essential skills, that stuff should be integrated throughout the whole curriculum. We should be teaching kids to get places on time. We should be teaching them the value of staying off of drugs. We should teach them the values of hard work.
Right. To pick up on the chamber, they talk about soft skills, just being presentable. As you said, showing up, being there. And what classes to teach that?
You know, I think that there are, I think you can teach those in every class, to be honest. I know that when I was in the classroom, I didn't tolerate kids walking in late. I didn't tolerate things being turned in late. I worked with them and sometimes realized that there might have been extenuating circumstances, but I think you can teach those things across the board. But I also think that especially in areas where we have particular opportunities around career and technical education, that stuff, and we really are big proponents of that. We really push that with all of our CTE teachers, those are core skills that are being taught in those courses all the time.
To get back to your earlier point, we hear of many college students going away, being undecided. It's costly, it's frustrating to parents. When does the time come when students need to identify their strengths and weaknesses and maybe their future goals, even deciding whether or not they're college bound?
Well, you know, I think you start that exploration really in middle school, but it's an exploration. I don't think it's that you're making a decision. I sit here before you today, and I was told that maybe I wasn't college material. And oh, how I wish that person that told me that was still alive. I'd love to give them my business card.
Show them your doctor.
I'd love to do that. But had I been limited, and had my parents not really pushed me to be better than maybe what some people thought I should have been, I would never have gotten there. And so what I think our schools have to do is they have to really create an environment that when a child walks across the stage at graduation, they have any opportunity ahead of them whether it be going straight into the workforce, 2-year college, 4-year college. But at the same time, there's got to be more exploration about what careers are even out there. I mean, you know, being an engineer is more than driving a train. It's also more than just building bridges. It's chemical engineers. It's you know, there's just so many options out there. And I think one of the things we've got to change how we do things, especially in high school, is we can't be so much course driven and a little bit more life driven, a little bit more contextualized, a little bit more of helping students see where what they are learning actually affects somebody's life somewhere.
Dr. Stephen Pruitt is Kentucky's Commissioner of Education, and we're visiting with him. We're going to talk about school safety and some other issues. We'll be back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in just a moment. Welcome back, WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, as we're visiting with the Kentucky Education Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Pruitt. He's with us today. We'll talk a little bit now about school safety. There's been a recent spike in guns in schools in Fayette County. It was very attention-getting in Lexington. The superintendent says he intends to start screening students entering high schools. Apparently there have been some questions raised about that. How concerned are you about those problems and how the schools deal with it?
School safety is paramount. You know, we have seen from the 90s that across the board, you know, we have to be more concerned about what's coming into our schools in the way of weapons. You know, Kentucky has been pretty proactive on the front of safety. In fact, we were one of the first states that required that school districts start to report restraint and seclusion with regard to our special ed students. For me personally, the safety of our students has to be a #1 priority. We're going to work on some different things at the department, working with our districts to make sure that we do everything we can to protect any child that walks through our doors.
The parents of a Jefferson County school student have been to Frankfort after their child's legs were broken while being restrained, and the son, Brennan, is autistic. You've addressed, as you just mentioned, this wider issue of student restraints. It's a difficult situation, though, isn't it, to try to maintain order in the classrooms and the schools? It
is. I mean, you know, anytime you're dealing with humans and dealing with bodies, especially at the high school level when they could be even larger bodies. But you know what, there are also very safe and effective ways to protect children, both the children who are in the classroom, but also the ones that are involved in an incident. We have been working really hard over the last several years with providing training for school districts and pushing our districts to ensure that there are people in the buildings, especially those who are working with students who might have a greater tendency to have control issues. There are safer ways to do things, but so much of it is diligence. So much of it is making sure that the training is there and that it's effective, and then holding people responsible and accountable to make sure that they are doing it correctly.
Are you generally satisfied that the way school campuses deal with potential outside intruders who might want to come to campus?
Yeah, I think that it can always be improved. You know, we've got some pretty old school buildings in our state, and I think that there's some issues that we have with facilities about how people can enter buildings and having the foyers there to be able to kind of cut people off, especially if they're coming in through the front doors. I think in general we've got some pretty good policies in place, but I think we can always get better.
Most parents watched with horror that school bus situation in Chattanooga, a bus driver supposedly driving erratically and the fatalities. We have a lot of bus accidents in Kentucky. Those are generally thoroughly investigated by local or state authorities, but how are those tracked and reported, and how can we be sure that those who are driving those buses are properly trained and accountable?
You know, Kentucky has some of the strongest bus safety laws and regs in the country. You know, I'm sure you remember years ago there was a horrific bus accident that really set Kentucky on a track to ensure that our bus system was also top notch. But at the same time, we also are facing some trouble. We're having a hard time finding people willing to drive buses. I think salary and the ability to protect your family, the ability to serve your family with salary from bus driving, it's pretty bad. And so I think it's making it hard for our districts to find good quality bus drivers. It's also making it tough to find enough people who are even willing to go through the training. So I think that while we as a state have the right policies and focus in place, I also think that we have other issues on the other end that we need to get quality people and get the quality training in there for our drivers.
And to speak up for the bus drivers, certainly they have tremendous responsibility, not only for the vehicle, but the safety of the children and all of that. And then they're being asked many times to work for part-time pay.
And I've said all along, I was a classroom teacher and I sat with 30 kids in front of me. I don't know if I would want to sit with 60 kids behind me and literally their lives being in my hands. Those bus drivers, they really deserve our respect. They deserve to be honored because they are, in many ways, I think that they're heroes because they take care of those kids. We've got to do it, and people need to stop and think about that. It's awfully hard to imagine, and I haven't seen it a whole lot in Kentucky, but every now and then you do see where a person passes a bus with the sign out, and you go, really? Like I said, I haven't seen it here in Kentucky because as commissioner, I think I'd probably, as they used to talk about Andy Griffith, maybe try to do a citizen's arrest.
Right.
But we as a whole Commonwealth and as a community, we need to be aware of what's going on with our buses. We need to be paying attention to our buses, not just get aggravated because we're behind them in the morning, but actually respect the fact that those bus drivers have an incredible responsibility in their hands.
It seems to me that when I was younger, there were more frequently teachers who would also drive the bus morning or afternoon or both, I guess for extra pay. That is not as common today?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's, there's so much more responsibility on the part of the teacher to be there before and after school, whether it be paperwork, but hopefully most of what it is they've got students coming in before or after school who need extra support. And I think that having our teachers in our classrooms to actually support kids who need extra time and learning would be the best way to go. The flip side of that is we need to do a better job taking care of our bus drivers, which hopefully will lead to more people being bus drivers.
We are here with the Kentucky Education Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Pruitt. We're going to come back, wrap up on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in just a moment. WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers continuing with Dr. Stephen Pruitt, who is Kentucky's Commissioner of Education. We've covered lots of topics, and we'll do a few more here in our remaining time. Commissioner, Kentucky's been working on accountability standards so that you can keep track in Frankfort of what's going on out there in those local districts.
Yeah, we've had a great opportunity. The Every Student Succeeds Act was passed by Congress last year, actually around this time, and it really puts the authority for accountability back with the states. And it's an exciting and, to be perfectly honest, a little bit scary possibility. We get to make our own decisions about accountability, whereas since No Child Left Behind in early 2000s really told us this is what you're going to do. So we're working with our General Assembly. We've got a group of over 350 individuals that are working in different subgroups, helping develop a system that really is going to be focused on helping us narrow the achievement gap, that will put us in a place where we are really focused on student learning and not points that adults can achieve through an accountability system, but really puts it back with a focus on our kids.
Does it make the school districts competitive with each other, which has been has its detractors and its people who boost that idea?
I did 11 town halls last year, and going to do them again this year, and got great feedback. And one of the things I kept hearing over and over again was, we need collaboration. We need people, we need our schools to be working together. Because sometimes you'll have one school that has a great program in X and another school that has a great program in Y. What if they actually work together? So the idea of our new accountability system is, let's really focus on what's important, which is our kids, giving them a well-rounded, balanced education, holding them to high standards, but let's do it in a way that we're not pitting our schools and our districts against one another.
What has been your experience about the way Kentucky public education is governed? You're not a part of the governor's cabinet. You're not elected, as many states do. They're a superintendent of public instruction, as Kentucky used to do. Local districts still have a lot of autonomy, but you can step in. So how does it all work?
Well, you know, one of the things that drew me to Kentucky is the fact that my job really is not about the politics. You know, I obviously have to work within it and all that, but I get to really focus on what's going to be the best for our kids. I get to be the expert in the room, if you will, about education. Doesn't mean people always listen to me, but I get to be that public school advocate. I get to be the advocate on behalf of our 650,000 students. The way that all of that kind of plays together is, I believe that and again, this is one of the things that brought me to Kentucky. I believe that Kentuckians really care about their education system. I think that shows from back in the early 90s with Kara through today. I think it shows when I did 11 town halls, and we had, you know, we always had between 150 and 300 and 400 people that would show up on a weeknight to come and talk to the commissioner. Our members of the General Assembly, our governor, you know, all these people really care about education. And so I want to believe and do that our districts have the best interests of our kids at heart, but at the same time, sometimes they need a little help, and that's where the agency needs to be able to either step in and help correct course. More than anything, what I'd like to do is be the agency that finds a way to say yes, that we can find a way to help support them in a way that actually helps move kids forward.
That they more or less consult with you.
That's right.
All right. Commissioner, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. And I know it's going to be off to a break for some students here soon. I'm sure you want them to continue to learn.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. I'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.